Hello and a very warm welcome to Your Voice here on BBC News. I'm Kasia Madeira. Today we're looking at the meningitis outbreak in Kent and what it means for you. We're going to be looking at what meningitis is, the symptoms, vaccinations. We're also going to get a live update from Kent. Now, to answer all of your questions, we've got some very special guests. We're joined by the GP, Dr Ellie Cannon, also the Chief Executive of Meningitis Now, Dr Tom Nutt. Welcome to you both. We're also going to be joined by our health editor, Hugh. We're going to be live for an update in Kent as well. And we're going to be speaking to somebody who contracted meningitis when she was just a baby. So all of that coming up. But I think, Dr Ellie, let's start with you, because I think it's just worth us just establishing in basic language, what is meningitis?
So meningitis is an infection within the brain, actually within the lining of the brain, which are called the meninges. There's lots of different things that can cause meningitis. So it's not just caused by one bug. It can be caused by different bacteria and different viruses, actually. And it can be a very serious and, sadly, as we've seen, fatal illness in certain cases, depending on what has caused it and also depending on who has contracted it. So it can be very serious in young people under the age of 5 and also, sadly, as we've seen, in young adults.
Yeah, Ellie, thank you very much. Tom, Ellie there talking about just how serious this is. Help us to understand the serious nature of meningitis.
Meningitis causes devastation when it strikes. Around about 1 in 10 people affected by bacterial meningitis, which is what we're talking about here in the case of the Kent outbreak. Around about 1 in 10 will die, and it's not unusual for people to die within 24 hours or less. And of course, it causes untold pain and devastation to families, those people directly affected. And as we're seeing played out in Kent, it has a ripple effect across university campuses, school communities, and of course the wider community as well. So there's no doubt that there's something particularly nasty about this disease.
A nasty disease, a serious disease, but there are vaccinations. Ellie, just talk us through what the options are, because we've got quite a few people asking about vaccinations, whether what they mean. We've got Ross Henley from Wokingham who says, if my teenager had all the available meningitis vaccines as an infant, are they protected? And actually, before I'm going to group a couple of these questions together, because we have another person, Christina from Windsor, also asking, has the meningitis vaccine changed in 2015 to include meningitis B? So I just want a broad overview of where we stand with the vaccinations.
Yes, it's really good to talk about this because it can get quite confusing because, as I said, lots of different things can cause meningitis. So meningitis B, you've just mentioned there, that's one of the bacteria that can cause meningitis. And now we vaccinate babies against meningitis. But it's very possible that teenagers who are now teenagers or students at university were not vaccinated against meningitis B, because that was not on the schedule when those young adults were babies. So it's very possible that the teenagers now are not vaccinated against that unless they've opted into that privately. We also vaccinate as routine for babies against meningitis C, as well as actually people won't realise that other infections that we talk about, like pneumococcus and even things like in your MMR vaccination, those infections can also cause meningitis. So there's lots and lots of protections there when children are young. And then when children are teenagers, often when they're at school and hopefully before they go to university, they have something called meningitis ACWY, and that protects against all those meningitises. But I think the concern right now is that the young adults we've got who were affected in this outbreak have not been vaccinated against meningitis B specifically, and that is what parents need to be checking.
So, Tom, that's a really good point, Ellie. Thank you. How do parents check whether their children, their teenagers, their young adults have been vaccinated against meningitis B specifically? What do they need to do?
Well, I think it's highly unlikely that any teenagers or young adults will have had that Men B vaccination unless they've opted to have it privately through a high street or supermarket pharmacy. Um, so, if parents would like to know whether their children are up to date with all their vaccines, then they need to phone their GP practice or look on their NHS app and find out what vaccinations they've had. Of course, this gets a little bit complicated, doesn't it? Once children turn 18, then of course parents can't phone on behalf of their children. So this is something young adults need to do themselves. But just to underline what Ellie has said, I mean, we have a fantastic NHS immunisation schedule here in the UK, but it is worth your viewers knowing, and you asked me about parents, it's particularly worth knowing for parents to be aware that whilst the vaccinations in place on the NHS schedule give protection against most causes of meningitis, they really don't protect against all of them. And Men-B is the big gap for this age group, as we've seen most likely playing out in Kent at the moment.
So, Tom, in a sentence, go and do it privately.
I think we would encourage people to make an informed choice. If you look on the Meningitis Now website, you can see lots of information about the risks and about what a vaccine looks like for this age group. But it's not a cheap vaccine, in all honesty. So I think it's really important that parents make an informed choice about how they go about protecting their adolescents. As a side issue, we as a charity would encourage the government to think about putting in place a programme to vaccinate teenagers and young adults, because we think that the price of deaths in this age group is a price that's too high. And there is a vaccine out there. We know that it works. We know it's effective. So we'd like to see that vaccine introduced for this age group.
OK, so that's meningitis, what it is, the vaccination's on offer. Let's talk about the signs and the symptoms. Ellie, what are we looking out for? Because this is a complicated one.
It is complicated. I mean, there are typical infection symptoms with meningitis that you would get with any infection, so feeling unwell and a temperature. But the key things to know with meningitis, rather than other infections, those are red flags, if you like, are specifically that it causes a headache, it causes pain or difficulty looking at lights, which obviously is quite a unique symptom, causes neck stiffness, causes a temperature. And people talk about the rash of meningitis, and it's really important for people to realise that the rash doesn't necessarily come first. It can come quite late. So if you see the rash, it's already a medical emergency. And typically the rash of meningitis, when you press it with a glass, it does not disappear. And that's the very typical rash that young adults and parents should know about.
And let's bring in our health editor, Hugh Pym, because Hugh, obviously, given what has happened in Kent with the tragic fatalities there with this meningitis outbreak, schools are on the lookout, they're on high alert. What have schools been told and what are they telling parents?
Well, I think one of the messages you've heard from Ellie and Tom there is this vaccine for certain strains of meningitis, which is provided through schools for 13 and 14-year-olds. Now, it's really important, as you've been hearing, that vaccination does take place. And I think the message is going through schools and through public health messaging is to get across to pupils who haven't had it to go and get it done because of this at-risk group. Seen as late teenagers, and they may well be students living at close quarters, where there are likely to be more risks of infection and social mixing and that sort of thing. So for that particular group, I think that is the message there. And of course, just generally emphasising the symptoms, as you've been hearing from Ellie, that you don't have to have all those symptoms to have meningitis, just some of them. But if you're at all worried, and this is a general message as well as through schools, you should call 999 or even go to A&E if you're seriously unwell, and then look out for friends who may suddenly become unwell as well.
Hugh, as always, thank you so much. We're going to talk about meningitis with somebody, with a family who've experienced it directly. I'm pleased to say that we're joined by Karen Williams and her daughter Gemma. Gemma, you contracted meningitis when you were just 6 days old. You're now 32. Thanks so much for joining us here on BBC News. Just talk us through a little bit, Gemma, of what living with post meningitis, what it's like having contracted this. Gemma and her mum Karen joins us. I hope you can hear me. Give me a big nod if you can.
Yeah, sure.
Lovely to see you both. Gemma, you contracted meningitis when you were just 6 days old. You're 32 now, and it's great to see you. But just how has this impacted your life?
Hi. So yeah, as you said, I contracted meningitis at 6 days old. I've had a lifelong impact from having had meningitis. I've got an acquired brain injury as a result, which affects my memory, mainly short term. I also have cerebral palsy, which means that my left arm is shorter than my right and it doesn't go in the air. So I have to modify a lot of everyday tasks, and the house is modified so that I can reach items because I can't put my left arm above my head.
Family impact?
Yeah, obviously it's impacted the family, everyone that I know. Obviously, you know, you live through it as well and can recall me being unwell, which I can't recall because I was so young.
Yeah. Well, let's bring Mum into this, because it's really interesting to hear that kind of long-term impact, Gemma. But Karen, it must have just been absolutely terrifying.
I think terrifying is the word. And until recently, I think we were still both going through the motions and not really accepting what we'd been through. So as a first-time mum, for me, Gemma really survived, probably because of my gut instinct. She didn't have a lot of the signs and symptoms that as ambassadors for Meningitis Research Foundation we talk about. No rash, no reaction to light, no vomiting. And because she was so young, she literally did just sleep. And although I sought medical advice, I was told baby will wake up when she's hungry. And something just told me that didn't sit right with me. So a locum GP came out and said, I think you don't even need to wait for the ambulance. We were living in North London at the time, and you can imagine the rush hour traffic. But we got in the car with Gemma and took her straight to hospital. And then she was there for 8 weeks at Paddington St Mary's. And ironically, the drugs that they were trialling, I was asked, and her daddy, could they use them with Gemma, because sadly she wasn't going to survive. That was the prediction. Oh. And of course we said yes. And then the first year volunteering for meningitis research, we were giving a speech at their conference in London, and in the audience was the professor who was part of the team that came and picked Gemma up, and part of a team that saved her life, basically. He told us that the injections she'd been given, the medication, had been sponsored by Meningitis Research. And so we went full circle, and it was traumatic, to say the least.
Absolutely traumatic. Karen, Gemma, thank you so much for just sharing your lived experience. And I mentioned the word terrifying. It sounded absolutely terrifying. But Gemma, we really appreciate you talking to us. Let's bring Tom back in, because Tom, what Gemma so eloquently described was this long-term impact of meningitis, then living with it afterwards. I think most people don't really realise just how impactful this is.
Indeed, and unfortunately I couldn't hear what Gemma was saying then, but I can imagine, because we as a charity spend a lot of our time helping people with their aftercare and support. Somewhere between a third and half of people who survive meningitis, bacterial meningitis, will suffer after effects that range from amputation, so therefore limb loss, through to sensory impairment, brain injury, as well as the psychological and the emotional trauma as well. So this is a devastating disease, even once people get the necessary treatment in hospital. After they leave hospital, very often people feel very isolated and alone. Meningitis is thankfully relatively rare, but it does mean that you can be you can emerge from the hospital and think, goodness, there's no one around me who understands just quite what I'm going through. And I suspect, given that Gemma is now 32, so many years on from that experience as a baby, it shows just how long these after effects can endure.
Yeah, certainly. And I guess what we need to now focus on is how this spreads. How can we keep ourselves safe? Hugh, so just talk us through, how do we pass on meningitis to each other? Of course, we've got that big outbreak in Kent. How is it spread?
Well, it's close personal contact, and it can even be spread by somebody who has the bacteria maybe in their throat and they don't even know that. So somebody without symptoms potentially can spread it. It's not as infectious as flu, or certainly not as infectious as COVID, but generally living at close quarters, doing a lot of socialising, being in a crowded sort of environment, which is often where students are, that's how it can be spread. So I think that the warning is that people should just be careful in that sort of environment where there is known, as we know now from events at the University of Kent, just be very aware of that in terms of social contact. But it's certainly, just to reassure people, it is not spread as rapidly to other people as some of these other diseases that we've been hearing about in recent years. That being said, it can take a turn for the worse really quickly. You might have the symptoms that have been set out earlier: a headache, a fever, dizziness, sensitivity to bright lights, and actually then be quite a lot worse the next day. That's why the message that if you have some of these symptoms, of course the rash that's been mentioned, it's really important to get medical advice as quickly as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Hugh, thank you for the time being. And when we talk about those big events, Fred from Bristol is actually making a really pertinent point. It's St Patrick's Day coming up, big events taking place around the country. How do people try to keep themselves safe? Ellie, with your doctor's hat on, what can people do in order to, well, still arguably enjoy these big events, but there is a danger there?
Well, there is, but the danger is very much focused on this sort of area of Kent, and I know what they are doing is they're offering sort of the young adults who are possible contacts and living within the sort of surroundings of the people who have had meningitis are being offered antibiotics, and they'll be offering that very sort of close surveillance. I don't think it's necessary for sort of people further removed from that to be worrying about events or to be worrying about gatherings. We're not in a situation like we were with COVID. It's not as infectious as something like that, and it's spread, as Hugh has said, from socialising, from living together. This is why it sort of goes around amongst students particularly. When we see outbreaks, they're often in students in universities, in halls of residence, because of the way students live together and socialise and work together. So it's not something that people, other adults, are going to get sort of just from going to parties or sort of going out and about.
And Hugh, when it comes to the situation in Kent, do we have an understanding why there has been such a big outbreak specifically there, given that we've got universities all over the country?
Well, that's what officials at UKHSA, the Health Security Agency, are trying to actually work out. They don't know what strain it is yet. They tell me it's very, very rare, this sort of thing. There aren't that many cases of this invasive meningococcal disease, as it's known. Generally, it's a matter of a few hundred each year. But I guess it's a combination of all these factors, isn't it? As Ellie has just said, the sort of living at close quarters, maybe a cohort of young people who didn't get that meningitis B vaccine from 2015, maybe during COVID they were at school when they might have got their year 9 and 10 vaccination against the other strains of meningitis. They may have missed out on that. So it's sort of all of these things possibly coming together, but it is being emphasised this is very unusual, very rare, but it is serious, and officials say it is concerning, but very much at the moment at that one site in Kent.
OK, well, let's cross over to Kent Live now because my colleague Simon Jones is there for us. So, Simon, obviously lots of questions there, but just bring us up to date on the very latest.
Yeah, the students here have lots of questions that they want answering, and that's reflected in some ways by the queue you can see behind me. These are people queuing up to get antibiotics as a precaution, but they're also going in speaking to medics about the questions that they have. Now, certain people I've been speaking to in the queue have very urgent reasons for coming here. I spoke to one man who said that just yesterday his sister was taken to hospital with suspected meningitis. He had spent time with her on Mothering Sunday, so he was advised to come here as soon as possible to get antibiotics. Another girl told me that she was in a halls of residence with one person who's been taken to hospital, so she had a very pressing reason to come here too. But others say they're simply coming here because they want reassurance and they want to make sure that they don't come down with this. So they are coming to get these antibiotics as a precaution in their cases. But certainly the numbers coming, well, they've been growing throughout the day. The queue actually started about 9 o'clock this morning, and it's probably as long as it has been all day as news of what happened spread. And that's why so many people here are coming saying they don't just want the medication, but they just want to know more about their own risk, their own safety, and how this has happened.
Simon, as always, thanks so much. We can very much see the queue behind you there of the students. Simon Jones there live from Kent. Thank you very much. Well, we've been hearing, we heard Simon there talk about some of the students he's been speaking to. We also heard from somebody who is a student at the University of Kent called Esosa, and they also have a little question for our panel.
In terms of the situation, I'd just say everyone's just a bit worried right now. Everyone's trying to stay indoors as much as possible and try not to make any journeys that aren't necessary outside of their room. So at the minute, everyone is just a bit worried. Obviously, like in group chats, naturally, you've seen like some clips like circling around of like photos of like the ambulances on campus and stuff like that. So everyone's just a bit worried right now at the moment. But yeah, everyone's just trying to stay calm. Yeah, just in terms of question, I'll probably say like, why now is it spreading? Like, why now? Like, is there a certain reason why it could be spreading?
Why now is the question. Tom, let's ping that to you because you've got a student there, obviously concerned. Why now? We heard some of the reasons, but what's your assessment of why now? Why in Kent?
Well, it's difficult to say, in all honesty. As we've already heard from other panelists, meningitis, although it is devastating, is relatively rare. We haven't seen an outbreak like this for a good number of years. There is a sort of tragic randomness to it in some ways. You know, the takeaway message for the student here and for other listeners is really there's a necessary vigilance that's required, you know, all the time. You tend to get more cases of meningitis in the autumn and the winter, particularly on campuses for the reasons we've already heard. But I think vigilance is really key. And just listening to the student then there, one thing he said that is potentially a little bit concerning. He said, of course, it's tempting, isn't it, when you're ill or when you're fearful to sort of take yourself away into your room. Just be careful, because, of course, meningitis is so fast acting. It's really important that if anyone is feeling unwell and they do want to rest or whatever, just let your flatmates know, let your next door neighbour know, let someone know who can keep an eye out on you. Because as those signs and symptoms progress, if it is meningitis, then it's really important that you seek urgent medical help. And so looking out for your mates, particularly in Kent tonight and in the coming days, I think is just really, really important.
It's a really good point, actually, isn't it? Buddy up with somebody, let people know where you are. If you're feeling unwell, flag it up. Ellie, as a GP, you know what's going to happen. You're going to have endless phone calls from worried parents, from worried young people as well. Just your top piece of advice, because we heard at the beginning there that the vaccinations, they are expensive, but everybody arguably will be really trying to find out a little bit more about how to get them. Is that the way forward?
Yeah, I think absolutely. If that is something that is attainable to you and your teenagers, to your young adults, and absolutely look into that. I would really reassure people that we never worry about people getting in touch with us. We never think, oh, you're being too cautious or you don't need to contact us. If you are worried about the symptoms of an infection or the symptoms of an infection in one of your children, please be in touch with the NHS as quickly as possible, whether it's your GP or 111, or if you're incredibly worried, of course, going to A&E. No doctors or healthcare professionals ever think they got in touch with us too quickly, and we'd much rather see you sooner rather than later.
Dr. Ellie Cannon, GP, thank you very much for those words, because sometimes you do feel like, oh, I don't want to burden our GPs. They're already so busy, but it's really good to know that they don't mind us calling, because I think there'll be a few phone calls. Dr. Tom Nutt, Chief Executive of Meningitis Now, and of course, as always, Hugh Pym, our health editor, thank you so much. And as always, if you have a question on any of the stories we're covering, you can get in touch with us via email, yourvoice@bbc.co.uk, or visit our website. From me and our panel, thank you very much.